Hey everyone, Ryan here at etrailer. Today we're going to be checking out the line of etrailer.com slipper springs for trailers. So leaf spring is a lot of times one of them components that kind of just get forgot about and overlooked when it comes to maintenance. But it's really important that your springs are in good shape because they're responsible for, supporting and managing the major load that'll be on your trailer. That way, you get the best performance and safety whenever you're towing your trailer down the road. Our main goal here today is to try to tell you how to figure out if your current leaf springs are bad or need replaced to begin with, and if so, how to figure out what replacements you're going to need, because there's a lot of different options out there and there's a few things to look out for when selecting a leaf spring. Especially with these etrailer ones, there's quite a few of them. They range from working with trailer axles that are 1,000 pounds all the way up to 8,000 pounds and everything in between. So a few things that you can do to help figure that out will be necessary to make sure that you get the right spring pack. First and foremost, how do you know if it's time to replace the spring? Well, everyone's situation is going to be a little bit different, but there's some main things to look out for to help determine that. A couple of them are pretty obvious, right? You could just do a visual inspection. Are they extremely rusty? It'd probably be time to change them. If so, something like this, I have the old one here off of this particular trailer, I'd say that's acceptable. A little bit of surface rust ain't gonna hurt anything, but if they're super degraded, that can pose a safety concern, be time to change them. Something else to look out for too is cracks, things like that. Are all the leaves actually still packed together, or are they completely separated? Pretty obvious signs to look out for when helping to figure out if it is indeed time to change or upgrade your leaf springs. Something else that tends to happen a lot, and it kind of goes hand in hand with a worn out leaf spring, is your bushings. All right, so the bushings are in the eye. If your leaf spring's worn out, chances are pretty good the bushings will be too, and there will be a lot of slop and play in there. A lot of times you'll get squeaks and clunks, things like that. And something else to look for, the spring, when it's in good working condition, it's going to have a nice bend in it, right? That way when you put the load on there, it'll squat down a little bit and help to support it. But unloaded, if your leaf spring is all flattened out and everything, there's nothing left there, right? So if it's unloaded and it's flat, think about when you go to put a load on it, it's going to be completely squatted down and you're not going to have that support you need. If you've determined that your trailer does indeed need new leaf springs, you can then move on to figure out what ones are actually going to work. So there's a couple of different styles, if you will. The ones that we're looking at today, they're called slipper springs, meaning one end of the spring is going to be flat and look very similar to this. There's some that have a hook in them as well, where it kind of comes down and hooks a little bit. Those are usually on axles that are a little bit heavier duty. But if that's how yours looks, you'd probably want to replace it with that same hook style slipper. And on the other end of the slipper springs, you'll have an eye where your bolt will go through to secure it to your trailer. There's other types of leaf springs that have an eye similar to this on each end. If yours is set up that way, a slipper spring isn't going to be the best choice for you. So with that said, if you got the double eye leaf springs, we carry a ton of different ones right here at etrailer. Definitely want to check those out, and that'll get you going in the right direction. If you figured out you do indeed have a slipper style leaf spring, where do you go from there, right? 'Cause like I said, there's a bunch of them available that have different capacities, lengths, so on and so forth. So a good start that I would do is figure out your axle capacity. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a tag or some type of indicator on the actual axle tube that will tell you that information. And for example, today you have a 2,000-pound axle. These ones here are 2,000-pound leaf springs. They kind of go hand in hand with each other, right? If you can't find a tag or anything like that on your axle, there's ways to go about figuring that out with some measurements you can take. A lot of times you can find a part number on the axle and reference that and kind of go from there. Same is going to hold true as well. You know, if by chance you see a part number on your leaf spring pack, probably be a good idea to write that down, cross-reference it, might get you going in the right direction. A lot of times though, if your leaf springs are worn out to begin with, probably not going to get that lucky. But, you know, with that in mind, axle capacity, good place to start. Once you figure that out, you need to figure out the measurements on your current or existing leaf spring pack. So there's several things that you can do. They're pretty quick checks, just so you can verify that the new one is indeed going to be a fit. Whenever you do go to measure, ideally you would have the trailer unloaded, the suspension unloaded, because the measurements of your new leaf springs are going to be as it sits right here. All right, there's not a load on it, which can affect things a little bit. But usually you can get away with 1 or 2 measurements and pretty much know right away if the new ones are going to be a fit or not. But a couple of them that you can take, number of leaves that are on your existing one. Usually those get you pretty close and usually kind of suited for different axle capacities. Higher the axle capacity, usually you're going to have more leaves there in the spring pack. Another one you can take, center of the eye, all the way to the very end of the leaf spring. Another quick thing you can check, which is pretty important, is the overall width of it. So how thick it is there. So if you determined that, you know, there's a fit for you that's made by eTrailer, where do you go from there? You know, what are the differences between the eTrailer one and some of the other brands? And so, for example, I just pulled one here that's made by Dexter, just so we can roughly compare. And a lot of times, you know, this kind of holds true across the board for a lot of the manufacturers. There's not going to be a ton of differences, right? Usually some subtle ones to kind of look out for. One of them being the finish. You know, the eTrailer ones have a really thick, almost rough finish. I feel like these would probably hold up pretty good. As to where the Dexter, for example, it's not bad by any means, but it just feels like thin paint almost. You can even see just from handling it, moving it around, the strap kind of started to wear a little bit there already. So, you know, I feel like the eTrailer one will have some advantages there as far as the coating goes to help, you know, prolong the life of it, prevent rust, so on and so forth. And then you can look for, so for example, the strap that holds all the leaf springs together. On the eTrailer one, it's thick. It has a really heavy-duty mechanism or pin here to keep everything secured. And this is a pretty important part, you know, because if this starts to degrade or come apart or whatever, then the leaf spring pack isn't going to be able to do its job. And like the Dexter one here, it's probably half as thick as the eTrailer one. And just kind of clipped on there. You know, not saying that this is bad by any means, but I'm just trying to, you know, show some of these smaller things to look out for when it comes to choosing a leaf spring for your trailer. And I want to mention as well, all the leaf springs are going to have nylon bushings in them, which have a 9/16 ID. So make sure you get the appropriate bolt kit that will work with your particular setup. Speaking of a bolt kit, that's something you're going to need to change pretty much every time when you go to replace your leaf springs, which I always recommend at least. And I also recommend to replace these in pairs because it just doesn't make sense not to do that, right? It'd be like changing one brake on your vehicle, you know. If you have a new spring on one side and a worn out one on the other, you know, your trailer's not going to ride right. It'll probably be on level, so on and so forth. So do them at the same time. And when it comes to that bolt kit, the way these work on pretty much all the trailers out there, so here's an old one, for example, they have splines on them, right? That way, when they go through the hanger, they're not going to spin or anything, all right? And so on these older, you know, when everything's worn out and old, you end up driving these out, you know, those splines usually roll and they're not going to be able to do their job, you know, when you go to reinstall them. A lot of times too, you might end up chewing up the bolt anyway, trying to get it out because it's super rusty. So we carry a ton of different bolts, you know, make sure that the length of your hanger, your shackle, however it's set up, the bolt will fit that. It's usually 3 inches, but there might be some longer ones, might be some shorter ones. Kind of just depends on what's going on there in your particular setup. And something that you can do that we did here today actually was upgrade to a wet bolt. All right, so the bushing that was in our etrailer leaf spring, you know, with the nylon ones, there's nothing wrong with these by any means. You know, you don't have to maintenance them or anything like that. But if you want to upgrade and get, you know, even longer life out of them, the wet bolts tend to run a little bit more quiet as well. What you can do is press these nylon bushings out, replace them with bronze or brass ones, and use that wet bolt. And with the wet bolt, you end up greasing them every now and again to keep them lubricated, and they just tend to hold up a little bit better and, like I said, run more quiet, at least in my opinion. From my personal experience replacing leaf springs, it's usually a good idea to pick up a new U-bolt kit as well. And there's a ton of them available, usually by knowing your axle capacity. That'll get you going in the right direction as far as picking a U-bolt kit out. And I say that because a lot of times, a vast majority of the time, what'll happen is these will be rusty or all chewed up and just old. And you try to end up, you end up getting a nut off, but it kind of messes the threads up. If you can't get it off, you're gonna end up having to cut it off. And it's just a good idea to kind of freshen everything up while you're in here. Like I said, it'd really be a bummer you set a day off to the side to replace your leaf springs just to get sidelined. One of the first steps you do, trying to get these off, end up having to cut them, and then you're waiting around for parts or running around trying to find something that's gonna work. So it's always a good idea to, like I said, get those bolts, get the U-bolt kit. That way everything's new, it's all gonna be compatible. And when you do, set that day off to the side to do some maintenance, you're gonna be good to go. You're gonna be able to finish a job from beginning to end. Other than that, not really a whole lot to these. It's a leaf spring, but my main goal today was to try to get you going in the right direction, to figure out what parts you're gonna need and if these are even gonna work with your particular application. So hopefully the information that I give you helped you out in determining if the etrailer.com slipper leaf spring will be a fit for your trailer.